Hello, good afternoon. Today our guest is Professor Jason Hill, and like myself, Jason Hill is a Jamaican. Hello, Jason. How are you doing?
Hi, Lipton. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
So, Jason, how long have you been living in the States?
Well, I left Jamaica in 1985, so I've been here for 40 years.
Okay, 40 years. And how has the experience been for you?
It's been great. I mean, I left when I was 20, and my family and we moved to Atlanta and to Stone Mountain, Georgia, and so I lived there for 8 years. I did my bachelor's in philosophy and literature there, and worked a couple of years and to put myself through school, and then got a scholarship to do my PhD in philosophy at Purdue. So I was there for 4.5 years. And then I got my first job at Southern Illinois in Edwardsville and did a postdoc at Cornell. And I've been in Chicago now at DePaul University, where I'm a professor for about 25 years. So the experience has been good. I've really enjoyed living in America. I've it's a country where I've pinned my aspirational identity. It's allowed me to become many things I wanted to become and to achieve the majority of the goals that I'd set for myself as a young child. So it has not been without its challenges, of course, but largely it's been a wonderful experience. I must say, living here.
Tell me about your book, The Immigrant Experience. So, you wrote a book about your experience as an immigrant in America, and you praised America, and you debunked some arguments pertaining to systemic racism.
Yeah, so that was a book published in 2018 called "We Have Overcome: An Immigrant's Letter to the American People." And there are a couple of things I wanted to do in that book. One is I wanted to show that, I wanted to tell the immigrant story, particularly immigrants of color. And so what I did was I explained my story. I showed the story of Vietnamese immigrants, of other Jamaicans, Africans who had come to America, many of them from middle class backgrounds like myself, but who came with very little. Like I came with $120 in my pocket and I had to start from scratch. And they too had to start from scratch. And with a lot of perseverance and tenacity and grit and resilience, made something remarkable of their lives. And so one of the arguments I was making in the book was that if there was endemic systemic racism and it had pervaded the entire culture, how did so many immigrants of color that I knew personally and that I had also read about manage to make something so substantial of their lives? And I also wanted to show that, since I wanted to explain what I thought was exceptional about America. So there was something about exceptionalism about the American system, the constitutional republic, that sort of made it different from other forms of government. There's a reason why so many people wanted to come to America. And I wanted to explain that phenomenon. What was the attractive thing about America that lured people to its shores, and explain the moral meaning of America, the founding of America and the crucibles in which America was forged, and also just to explain the ways in which I think America was on a sort of declinist trajectory. Also, Lipton, that the educational system was going downhill. As someone who had been a professor for many years, to explain how our educational system was declining. But it was a very positive book. It was sort of like my love letter to the American people and to the country, to celebrate the best within America, and also a warning about some of the more negative aspects, I thought, that were taking root in the country.
Jason, I'm happy that you made reference to the founding of America because the American Constitution is a brilliant document. The founding fathers of America were quite unusual. They cared about intellectual property law, economic freedom, and innovation. When most people are building a country, these issues are not at the forefront of their mind, especially during that era. Maybe today it's a bit different, but back then most people did not care about intellectual property, law, and economic freedom. So America was designed to promote economic growth and innovation. It's still the best place for scaling human talent.
I think so. I think what people also need to realize is that America was founded not based on economic equality, but really on political equality. And that's something that people forget quite often, that political equality and economic equality are very different things. That uh, economic equality sounds a little bit like socialism. There's nothing in economic equality that can be guaranteed in a capitalist society or a free market enterprise, because people have different talents. We're not actually all equal in talents, in dispositions. In some of us are better suited at other things than others. Some of, I'm not the equal of Usain Bolt in my athletic prowess, right? And then there are people who are smarter than I am and more gifted in other areas. But we can, what was unprecedented about, I think, the American system is that, in spite of the differences and the what I call the metaphysical equalities, or the cosmic differences that we're endowed with, those are irrelevant. We are endowed with equality before the law, that the law makes or ought not to make any sort of distinctions among its citizens, and endow each person with a reverence and a recognition of the inviolable dignity that is possessed by each person, and recognizes a moral equality that translates into uh, an equality that is deserving, that each person deserves in terms of treatment under the law. And that's one of the remarkable things that the Constitution promised. It didn't, of course, allocate or distribute that promise to all persons at its founding, but it was, it was a work in progress. It was a developing document, and through its amendments, of course, today, and especially since the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, we see the promissory note that was the original document, having arrived at its full, what I call its full instantiation.
Jason, there is a video circulating online, and the video, according to its supporters, shows Sam Cedar owning a man, but the man was not owned by Sam Cedar. The person was unable to explain his point. So Sam Cedar said the Constitution does not protect people against racial discrimination. And the guy responded by saying, "What are you talking about?" Something to that effect. And then Sam Cedar said, "You're conflating the civil rights law with the Constitution." And my response is quite simple. Sam Cedar didn't own that young man. That young man was just not as informed that he should have been. We don't want a constitution that specifically protects people on the basis of race. So, for example, if the Constitution had been wired in the context that Sam Cedar wants it to be wired, it would have been so easy to sue companies because the board of the company did not comprise of an equal number of women. So the young man was just a bit perturbed. He was not able to articulate his points effectively. But it's good that we don't have a constitution that explicitly states if you discriminate in the private sector on the basis of race, we're going to sue you. That's really good that we don't have such a constitution.
Well, you're right, but I I think I make a little in one of my in my second to last book, which is called "What Do White Americans Owe Black People: Racial Justice in the Age of Post Depression." I grapple with this a little bit, Lipton, because I do say that the 1964 Civil Rights Act is a very unusual piece of legislation, in that, of course, it did outlaw racism in the private sphere. the private sector, and it said it was a sort of eugenical document in the sense that it was trying to socialize or re-socialize the sensibilities of white people and say that you can't be a racist and you can't use your private business as an extension of your living room and discriminate on the basis of race. And I grappled with this on the basis on the following reasoning, that the state had so colluded with whites that the greatest enemy of black people in America was not private white citizens, but it was the state who had first sanctioned, endorsed, legislated discrimination against black people, had colluded with white people, and had actually turned white people into racists. So, given the nefarious history of the greatest enemy of black people in America, which was the state, who legislated discrimination against black people and had turned non-racist white people into racists. For example, there were lots of the history shows, the archive shows that there were lots of hoteliers, there were lots of real estate persons who only saw green, who wanted to rent to blacks, who wanted to sell to blacks, but because of discriminatory laws by the state, could not do so. You just look at miscegenation laws that were on the books until 1967 in Loving versus Virginia, which overturned that. That the state was the greatest propagator of racism. So I make a very subtle argument in my book that says that given the collusion, well, given first of all the extent to which the state was so racist against black people in America, and given the collusion between the state and the private sector in forming discriminatory policies, I think the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which outlawed private racism, had a significant role to play in terms of undoing a great harm that was done to black people in this country. Now, how far that should go, like in terms of affirmative action programs, can be debated. Should there be an expiration date on affirmative action programs? I think so. Have we gone beyond a certain pale of racism such that affirmative action programs are no longer necessary? That's very reasonable and very debatable. But so yeah, I think for me that's something that I grapple with a lot, because when I look at the history of racism and the role that the state has played in cultivating that racist ethos and discriminatory laws, when the state ought to be neutral and ought to be colorblind, but was not colorblind, um, and played an active role in configuring racist private citizens. Um, yeah, my position there is a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, it's okay to be complicated. I've interviewed all sorts of complicated people on this show. Racist planters during enslavement preferred to employ competent blacks. They would rather pay a competent enslaved black overseer than an incompetent white person, but they were still racist. Racist people care about money.
Hmm.
And this was during slavery. Working class whites, they did business with enslaved people.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
working class whites, they were exposed to black culture. Many of them were racist. In the later part of American history, like 1950s, 1960s, poorer whites were more racist, but because of economic reasons, they engaged black people. So when it comes to money, people forget about racism.
Yeah. That is true. Historically, that has been true, I think. Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't. If you are racist, that is your choice. If somebody does not want to be in my space because I am a black person, not my business. I don't care because most people are not racist. And if you're racist, as the research of Gary Becker and other individuals show, you're going to lose out in the market.
Yeah, you're going to lose out in the market because you're going to lose out on the talented individuals who you're discriminating against. So, and there's always in a free society there's always going to be the rational employer who will snap that person of color up that you're overlooking because of your bigoted, psychotic, racist view has prevented you from employing. Yeah.
Exactly. But let's talk about affirmative action. What's your current position on affirmative action? My position on affirmative action is that it is not necessary, point number one. And point number two, people who are displaced due to affirmative action, they still do as well as students who attended elite schools because cognitive ability matters. So affirmative action is not conferring an advantage on black students because many of the black students who benefit from affirmative action, some of them drop out of school. And there's one study, this study was done in the Brazilian context. It showed that the beneficiaries of affirmative action, over time, their wages diminish because cognitive ability enables higher wages. So if you don't have the IQ to sustain your progress in the labor market, your wages are going to fade out. So that's why I don't support affirmative action because I don't believe that affirmative action is elevating the middle and upper middle class black people who benefit.
Well, that's true. I mean, initially I was a supporter of an incremental affirmative action when the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed. That affirmative action had a proper place in American society, um, because it it was needed to sort of level out the playing field, and that the culture emerging out of a sort of Jim Crow ethos, with racist sensibilities still in place, where a brilliant black person was still not recognized as the equal of a brilliant white person, that it had in the history of the United States, that it had a proper place and a proper role. Over time, we have seen that the greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action have been middle class white women and bourgeois blacks, and that working class black people have not really benefited that much from affirmative action. So I do believe that the time has come for a gradual phasing out of affirmative action to take place, um, and not necessarily because it is something like reverse discrimination, but because the logistics of it are not just complicated, but those for whom it was designed to benefit are not benefiting from it. And moreover, as a professor of 25 years, 28 years actually, I can attest to the fact that when you implement policies and you lower standards for a minority or a particular group of people, and those standards uh, are such that they don't allow them to matriculate or through
Exactly, the
through through the
mismatch effect.
right, they don't allow them to matriculate through the four-year baccalaureate program because they can't compete with their colleagues. And you see over and over again that the attrition rate among blacks who benefit or supposed to benefit from affirmative action, the dropout rate or the attrition rate is very, very high because they're held to a different standard. I would rather see something like universities be committed to remedial programs, right? Where low income Black Americans who, through no fault of their own, um, are relegated to an inferior education because of their zip code, because we know that public education is financed by property taxes. I'd rather see something like colleges have remedial programs to bring the leverage or the skill set of Black Americans up to the par, than to have something like affirmative action, which is just an artificial way of pretending that those who are not qualified for admission are actually qualified. So there are colleges who have remedial programs that are designed to bring the reading and the math skills, because our K through 12 schools are graduating people who are innumerate and functionally illiterate, and that is something that I would defend in if colleges decided to do that in place of something like affirmative action.
Well, some people would say colleges should not have remedial programs. Probably some individuals don't need to go to school. My suggestion is a bit simple. We need to recruit better teachers.
Mm.
In countries where students do well, the people who teach are smart. We need to recruit better teachers. When we recruit better teachers, our students will do well, even the student who struggle. I interviewed an academic some time ago, and he said that high IQ teachers, they compensate for the deficits of low IQ students. So
Hmm.
if the teacher is operating at a high level, the students will do better. So that's my suggestion. We need smarter teachers, and better technical schools, because the reality is that we're heading to that era where people with technical skills will out earn white collar workers.
Well, I think both can exist. I mean, I
Exactly. No,
one
seriously, Jason, I was watching a documentary on CNBC, and some pretty smart kids, they're getting a skill and they're earning good money. So maybe that's what we should encourage.
No, I've always said, again, as someone in the classroom who's witnessed students who don't belong there, but who should be plumbers, who should be woodworkers or carpenters or construction workers. I'm a big advocate of vocational schools, Lipton. I'm a big advocate of
And they're
technical
earning a lot of
schools.
money these days.
But the thing is that we're still fighting the stigma that the only way to upward social mobility is through a 4-year baccalaureate, which is a myth, right? So most Americans are still wedded to this bourgeois idea that social upward mobility is through a baccalaureate, and also there is a s- there is this bourgeois idea that blue collar work is still stigmatized, right? Although they're making far more money than a beginning college professor would make. So we've got to debunk that idea, and we've got to look at the actual capabilities of a number of, especially these boys who are fixers. Men like they think that are broken. They're good with their hands. They're spatially oriented. I've taught at 5 different universities, including a few European ones, and I've seen over and over again boys whose intelligence lies in their hands, and they are meant to be not stuck behind a desk, bored out of their wits. I'm not saying they shouldn't have at least some semblance of a liberal arts education, but they don't belong in a 4-year institution. They belong in a vocational school where they can learn the basics of mechanics to fix a car or plumbing. And yeah, and I think the two can exist side by side. There's
Exactly.
yeah, yeah,
That's what some people usually forget about the Singaporean model. Education is stratified based on ability and preference. So many students in Singapore, they might not do well in an academic setting, but they do well in a polytechnic setting, and they like it.
yeah,
We're
exactly.
trying to catapult our students to become philosophers and scientists, and many students just don't have that skill. And do you know what's funny? Based on what I've read, countries evolve economically because of human capital. So skills that people possess, their expertise, not necessarily getting a degree. So if you get a degree, you should write a book. It's really
Hmm.
about the application of your talent. And people with special abilities, they're good at applying their talent because that's what they were trained to do, to fix things, to execute, just like engineers.
That's right. That's right. So there's a sort of cognitive dissonance that's going on because we're endowing degrees on people who are
Exactly.
ill suited to use those degrees in a real tangible way, and there's a misreading of the real talent and skills that these people possess. but it's a I see it with my students, and especially the immigrant parents who are vicariously living their lives through their children.
Exactly. They want the students to get a PhD and become a professor because
Yeah,
in the Caribbean, that's what they value.
that's what they value. And in the and it also in the east coming from East India, east Southeast Asian countries, where they want their children to become entrepreneurs or doctors or lawyers, and a lot of these or IT workers, and a lot of these students are deeply unhappy, deeply depressed because their sensibilities lie elsewhere, and it's an ongoing battle. It's part, but it's part of also the myth of. It's also part of the mythology of the American dream, right? That upward mobility is wedded to to pedigree, and part of how you acquire pedigree is to acquire one or many college degrees. God forbid that you should tell your parent, I want to become a plumber, or a mechanic where you can make a decent living. You're sort of slumming down, and we've got to, especially educators, have got to sort of debunk that idea. And
Well, I was watching a documentary recently with this young man. He is working in the technical space. I don't remember the type of business where he's currently employed, but he sounds intelligent and he plans to start a private equity company. He owns his own business. In 1 year, he made like what, over 200,000 US dollars. And I'm saying this guy is going places.
yeah,
And I also discovered that many technical jobs require deep thinking. They're becoming quite difficult to maneuver.
yeah,
They're,
yeah,
they're, they're not as easy as people assume.
right, right,
If you want to work in an airport setting, let's say you're going to fix a plane, physics is important, mathematics is important, measurement is important. So we shouldn't belittle those jobs.
no. And look, given the high cost of education, right, and the increasingly high cost of education and the bloated bureaucracy that is taking over universities, I think what we're going to see increasingly is businesses are going to start apprenticing high school graduates and credentializing them with the skills that they need on the job, training them on the job, and bypassing the whole university thing, the whole university route. And because it's the university I teach, DePaul, it's $40,000 a year to attend, right? So you get a degree, and you spend $40,000 getting a marketing degree, which I think is one of the most useless degrees that one can get.
Exactly. Well,
Uh,
why would you say so?
well, what are you going to do with a marketing degree after having spent $40,000 that you can't do with those skills that you've acquired in college that you couldn't acquire by going straight into a company and learning marketing skills on the job,
I'm
or
laughing.
by watching a couple YouTube videos, or
Exactly. I'm laugh. Do you know why I am laughing? I am laughing because most marketing initiatives fail.
yes,
Yes, they fail. Being a talented marketing executive is really about your aptitude and sometimes luck. Most marketing initiatives fail. So marketing professors have so little knowledge to transmit.
exactly, exactly. Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, there's really nothing to learn. Like marketing is not a productive degree.
It's not a productive degree. Lots of degrees are not productive, but they're branded, and they're people are hoodwinked into thinking that they need these degrees in order to succeed. And of course, they cannot get beyond the fact that, again, pedigree has been sold as a badge of honor that is part of how you navigate in the world. With By being pedigreed is to be degreed. And but I think people are going to wean themselves off of this idea because they will have no choice, because um, with rising tuition costs, and when you realize that when you're saddled with a debt of $120,000 after college, and your chances of starting your own small business that you've dreamed of is going down the toilet, Your chances of buying your first house by the time you're 30 is out the window. Your chances of starting a family before you're 30 is out the window because you're saddled with so much student debt and you haven't gotten the job that you dreamed of. I often tell my students, I told them 25 years ago that you need to take your education seriously because the difference between yourselves at DePaul and at Harvard is that the students at Harvard have better contacts on the ski slope, but really you're just being trained to be middle managers at Walmart and Target,
Mhm.
right? So I think by default, people will eventually, young students will eventually, and their parents wean themselves from this sort of ridiculous idea that upward mobility has one trajectory and it's through college and it's through spending a lot of money on college and it's through getting these useless degrees, and people will find more practical ways of making something substantial of their lives. Now, if you want to be a doctor, if you want to be an engineer, in my case, I had a vocational calling to be a philosopher. I mean, I write a lot of books, and I didn't have to go to school to write books. I was writing from I was 9 years old, but I wanted to be a teacher, a professor. So, and if you want to be a doctor, if you want to be, there are certain things for which you do need a degree. Um, but I see lots of students who have dropped out of college and have started their own startup companies, and they start off by doing menial jobs, and they build enough capital and
Exactly my point. I like Marcus Garvey. I'm not his biggest fan, but Marcus Garvey once said that blacks like to start from the top and implode down. They don't prefer to start from the bottom and build up.
yeah, right.
If we were more technical oriented, the black middle class would be larger. Most black Americans are not poor, but if we were more technically oriented, we would be richer. East Asians, yes, they are hardworking, they're smart people, but many East Asians migrated to America with limited education, limited skills, yet they started small businesses which did well.
Hmm.
That's why they're successful. It's not because of education, it's really about the execution of their entrepreneurial capital. If blacks had said, we're going to invest in our spatial abilities, become carpenters, and start small businesses, probably many of us would have been better off. But the
Yes.
black middle class, especially in the Caribbean, they opted to become professors and intellectuals. And I don't have a problem with people becoming professional. Professionals are important. But the reality is that you don't create long term wealth by becoming a professional.
Hmm.
So affirmative action might have destroyed the black middle class in so many different ways.
Well, it might. Well, one thing it might have done is it might have killed imagination and creativity, right? Because it sort of it doesn't allow you to look within yourself for other creative possibilities of for self actualization. um, that's one of the things that I think about. That there are many ways in which we can actualize and self-actualize and realize our multiple potentials, but affirmative action gives you a single metric or a single rubric by which you can self-realize yourself. It's working for the white man. It's getting this college degree, and there are other ways in which we can self-actualize. We can realize our potential. I don't want to use the old metaphor by pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. That's just too tired and worn. But
Yes.
I think you understand what I mean when I say that our creative agency is often sapped, and we're blinded to that creative agency through something like affirmative action quite often.
We started this discussion by discussing what white or black people. It was against the backdrop of historical discrimination and racism. That's how the discussion started. But what do blacks or whites? Some would say that affirmative action has been quite costly for the economy if companies, both in the public and the private sector, weren't trying to escape the legal liabilities associated with not complying with civil rights law. Probably those companies would have diverted more resources to research and development and the capital modernization. So,
Yeah.
what would blacks or white Americans?
Lipton, I don't think we owe anything other than just the respect of our inalienable God-given
I
rights,
agree.
right? I don't think, as I said in the books, white people don't owe black people a damn thing anymore. The debt has been paid. If there was a debt to have been paid, it was the 1964 Civil Rights was an amazing document. Blacks have been brought into the pantheon of the human community. They share all the rights now that whites have. Um, Along with the statutes and emendations, affirmative action, the 1972 Employment Act, the 1965 Voting Right Acts, everything that went with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Blacks, whites owe blacks nothing, and blacks owe whites nothing. Except we
So,
all owe each other to respect the inalienable rights of each other, to respect each other's property rights, individual rights, respect the bodily integrity of each other, and since have become quite religious, I would just say that we have an obligation to sort of respect the inviolable dignity and to affirm and validate each other as human beings. I mean, I think that's what we're not legally bound by these things, but I think that we are, as one people under God, we have an obligation to sort of affirm and validate the humanity of each other. But these are more religious mandates that I live by, um, in the moral sense, in the normative sense. I think we all owe each other that. We owe each other respect, and we owe each other a commitment to affirming the dignity of all persons, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity. But in the legal sphere, in the sort of in the political sphere, I don't think we owe each other anything other than the respecting the inalienability clause to which we are in which we cannot be separated from. It's part of our God-given nature.
exactly. People won't respect you if they are obligated to feed your desires. And that's why I don't support affirmative action and DEI initiatives. So I read an article recently stating that many of the people who are now unemployed because of the DEI cuts are black women. That's a problem. The private sector is more productive than the public sector. So if a high percentage of black people are employed in the public sector, what does that say about us?
Well, that there's a sort of hyper dependency on the state, which again goes back to my point that it goes back to the I would say Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty and the whole 1968 atmosphere of the Great Society, which led to, among other things, the breakup of the black family and the substitution for the where the state became the surrogate husband of the black woman, and the whole emasculation of the black man, and so on and so forth. And what we need to really be thinking about are ways in which, um, the state is not our friend. First of all, the state is not our ally. The state is there to protect our rights, our individual rights, and any kind of hyperdependency on the state is a crutch. And it is more than a crutch. It is a cudgel that is meant to to inflict an egregious harm, and that harm is to hide from us the enormous capabilities and talents that we have, which will never be realized if we are living in a hyper-dependent state on the state itself. So, I'm not. I think black women are very strong. I think black people are very resourceful. There are part of what I did when I worked on the 1776 project in conjunction with the 1619 project as a response to it was to show the enormous resilience of Black people during slavery, after slavery, during Jim Crow, the um, the Black Wall, what was called the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that Black people were building hotels, were building insurance companies, schools, hedge funds during the height of Jim Crow, during the height of segregation. There were intact, flourishing Black families at the height of the most discriminatory periods in America, and that was before the legislative protection against private racism. So I'm not too worried about the elimination of DEI. And
Neither am I. You know, Jason, controversy means new or different. I am not new, neither am I different. Some people would say that I'm controversial. I would say no. I have not written on issues which were not explored years before I was born.
mhm.
But this will sound a bit controversial. Racial politics, not my business. I am not invested in identity politics. But personally, I think that for Black America to be propelled to higher heights, the people who should be leading the movement ought to be individuals from the Caribbean, especially Jamaica. Some won't agree, but that's my opinion. You cannot underestimate the role of the Jamaican intellectual or entrepreneur in advancing this country forward. From the days of Marcus Garvey and Joel Augustus Rogers to today.
Well, I have gotten a lot of pushback for that. I tell you that. I mean, I've gotten so much hate mail and so many invectives have been
But
hurled
we have the
against me.
answers. No, if you say I'm arrogant, okay, Jamaicans are known for being boastful people, but we have the answers.
Well, I've been told I'm not a foundational Black, so I should
I
get out of
don't
the.
care about that. Like we have the answers. And in my again, well, this is not controversial, but in my interactions with whites, both in the US and the UK and some parts of Europe, like the UK and Scotland, I can tell you this. Many of them don't care for the native blacks in their countries. They will say that Jamaicans are problematic, but they prefer Jamaicans.
Yeah,
Yeah, they,
yeah.
they don't care for the native blacks in their countries. So if there is to be a black intellectual class, it should be spearheaded by Jamaicans.
Well, I think we do that by just that's part of the I think that's part of what I was trying to show and we have overcome. And people said, who has overcome? I said, well, we Caribbeans have overcome.
Exactly.
I mean, we have overcome. We have come to this country, and there was nothing for us to. It's paradoxical because I said in the book there was nothing that we had to overcome anyway, because we didn't come with a victim mentality. We didn't come with a fear of white people. We certainly didn't come with a sense of entitlement. We just came with our talent and our sensibilities and our can-do spirit and our overbearing confidence.
Yes.
And where others saw, patches of dirt, we saw pieces of gold, and we took it and we ran with it and we made something of our lives.
Yeah, like
Uh,
black Americans, they keep going around with this chip on their back. Oh, white people are a problem. They don't like whites. White men are a problem, and it's just so irritating.
well, I mean, you must. I think they have a history that we don't have, and I'm very sympathetic to a degree of the complaints because we didn't know what it was to sit in the back of a bus and to drink from a colored only sign, and um, or to enter black only bathrooms, or so there is a sense in which, when you live within the toxicity of an environment like that, and assaults to your dignity are you're assailed every day by assaults to your dignity, that it's a different experience that I don't think we had. And so, um, even I'll tell you the difference. Even when I am faced with racism in America, like somebody's overtly racist and will call me the N word, um, I just look at that person as a psychotic. I laugh. There's a way in which psychological I cannot be wounded by somebody who's mentally ill, which racism is a form of mental illness because it's an inability to perceive the subject that is standing before you. It is a form of gross misperception. So you're basically dealing with somebody who's mentally ill, who's somebody who's psychotic. That's what a racist is. And so the only reason that I can have that kind of psychological metal and backbone is because I spent the first 20 years in my life raised in a country which affirmed me, which validated me, which gave me that sort of confidence. Um, so I understand the what you're calling the chip on the shoulder. I sort of understand where that's coming from. But I think at some point, one has to sort of overcome that and move forward, um, and and get beyond it, and because there are lots of opportunities here, and as I said, if there really were systemic racism, then Nigerians, Africans, Caribbean blacks, all persons of color would be equally held back by that systemic racism, right? So on the one hand, I'm psychologically sympathetic. On the other hand, I think that in spite of one's experiences, one has a responsibility to move beyond those experiences and sort of.
Exactly. You wrote a piece which was published in Front Page magazine, and they agree with your article. I have been a critic of teacher licensing for a long time because, as I said earlier, well, I did not say this specific part of the statement earlier, but the best predictor of student performance, other than the genetic and cultural potential of the student, is teacher quality. Teacher licensing is not necessary. Not even getting a master's degree is necessary. Somebody with a degree in economics will be more successful at teaching economics than somebody with a degree in physics who is teaching economics. But somebody with a degree in economics who gets a master's is not necessarily a better teacher than the person with only the BSc in economics. So I agree with this article 100%. There is no rational need for a certification. Yes, there is a rational need if you're a government bureaucrat.
Right. I mean, when we were growing up, my teachers didn't have.
Well, sorry again, but you can't speak about Jamaica because Jamaica wants to license teachers now. So
They,
we're going back.
we're going back, yeah, yeah. But when I was growing up, I mean, all my teachers had were like bachelors in history, a bachelors in English. There was no there was no certification process, and they were just thrust in the classroom, right? So I think the teachers union, which should be abolished, it's a
It should be.
menace, is nothing but a big fat bureaucratic, bloated bureaucratic process to restrict talented people. Take all the unemployed PhDs, Lipton, that are graduating from our universities in literature, in whatever field, in history, and put them in the inner city schools to work. That would be a great thing. All these PhDs that cannot, because the job market is horrible. People in philosophy, people in English.
In software engineering, not just the humanities, even software engineering, people can't
Yeah,
get jobs.
put them in these schools to teach, right? And get rid of the certification process and put these talented, brilliant people to work in the K through 12 system and get rid of the certification process. The teachers union are there to the unions are there to benefit the teachers, not to benefit the students. They don't give a hoot about the students.
Exactly. So in a country like Jamaica, where there's a shortage of STEM teachers, so teacher licensing will inhibit those teachers from going into the profession because if you can earn more money in engineering than in teaching, you're going to work in engineering. If
Yes,
you're unable to get a job in engineering, you might work as a teacher. But if licensing is inhibiting you from working as a teacher, you might go and work at a bank or do something else
right,
because you
exactly.
have to pay to be licensed. The
Yes,
state won't sponsor it, you have to pay for it. And the state
yes.
is telling you to do something that is not empirically sound. Teacher licensing is not necessary for student performance.
No, no, it's not. No. And we don't have it in universities. I got a PhD. I didn't get a license to teach. I got the PhD and I just was pushed in the classroom, and I had to find my
Learn
way
about
of
time. Exactly.
disseminating knowledge and explaining the text and so on and so forth. So it's actually not a necessary prerequisite for disseminating knowledge and teaching people.
And despite the existence of the Department of Education, there are districts in America where all students are failures. They work below their grade level. And I've seen the data and I was shocked. All students are failures.
Yes, yes, and they replicate that failure in the universes as well.
Exactly my point. But Jason, you said that you are no religious. Why are you religious now?
Well, I was born in a religious household. I was raised Roman Catholic and was very religious, was an altar boy, and then went through a period of intransigent atheism for about 20 years. And found within that atheism, despite having achieved a lot of success, having achieved love, I found worldly success in my career, was traveling all over the world, giving lectures in Europe, in Asia, in all over the states on my books. There was a hollowness, there was an emptiness that I could not understand the genesis, the provenance of that emptiness. And I at some point I made a strategic decision. I said, okay, atheism is not an option anymore, but you just need is not belief. You just can't undo your atheism. And I began to sort of pray, although I didn't believe in God. I said, you know, just grant me grace and reveal yourself to me. And one day I was driving my truck to my first job, and I was very unhappy. And I said, you know, um, why am I unhappy? And I heard like a voice saying, well, what is the talent I gave to you? And I said, writing. And this voice said, well, write letters to me. So I have a book that was just published 2 months ago called Letters to God from a Former Atheist. And there began the origins of that book. And I started writing it. And then I shelved it for the next 20 years because I sort of lapsed between agnosticism and well, among agnosticism, belief, and atheism. And then I sort of had a conversion experience about 4 years ago. I found that my religious sensibilities began to grow, that um, I felt more like Aquinas, that reason and faith were not necessarily incompatible. And I just felt a growing space in my heart for God, where I can't explain the conversion experience. It happened.
Saint Augustine. I like Saint Augustine.
I do too. Yeah, it was. I think my sensibilities are more more Thomist, but the experience I had was more like Saint Augustine, where I heard the voice and I picked up the book, read it, convert, and was in church and had the conversion experience. And so it's been wonderful, and it's not been easy. There are times when I strongly feel the presence of God, but I think for me the important thing is to develop and to maintain a very strong prayer life and to talk to God. And I say in the book that He wants to hear your voice. He wants you to talk to Him as a
Yeah.
yeah, and as a parent would want a child to talk to them and to reason and to argue even with God
Mhm.
and to do battle and to pay homage and to glorify and to wrestle with God. And my life has become um, a lot easier psychologically, a lot easier psychologically.
Exactly. No, religion eases the burden of low socioeconomic status. Religious people are likely to be happy, they're pro social, and even individuals who are not Christians but they tend to believe in God, they have a better way of dealing with their problems based on what I've experienced and what I have read. Religion fills a gap in your life which a state cannot fill and which money cannot fill.
Hmm. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
money cannot fill the gap. The state can't fill it, and that's why even sometimes you meet people, they don't go to church, they're not theologically religious, but they believe in God, and they will say, Well, God gave me life, so I'll continue to trod. People
Yes,
who are atheists, they cannot draw on that philosophical foundation because it's lacking.
it's lacking. And money can't buy you meaning. These things are ephemeral, they're contingent, they go in and you have money today, you don't have it tomorrow, you have your health today, you don't have it tomorrow. But there's something that's transcendent about a belief in God that is higher than yourself, and that survives the vagaries of time and experiences, and that you can draw on, and that's enduring and that's lasting. And it's nice to wake up every morning and know that there's something unchanging, that there's something foundational that you can draw on, that will not change, that will not mutate into something different, um, that is enduring and lasting. And I find great comfort in that. I haven't found a church yet. I'm still sort of on my own there, looking and wondering if I'm asking for guidance there. I think I might have found a good church that I'm going to start, maybe to give it a try next week. But that's also part of the journey, because you need. I think one needs some semblance of fellowship and community, but also one has to be very aware of these. I call them Bible bureaucrats and moral hypocrites who stand up there and preach. And I'm very much like Luther in the sense that I don't need a theological expert to tell me what the Bible says. I just need to have an open heart and to let the word speak itself to me. And so that's sort of where I am in the journey. Um, it's really strong faith, um, really committed to God, but not a man without a church right now.
Well, maybe you should join an evangelical church. There are good evangelical churches. I like the Anglican church, but I think an evangelical church would have more institutional support. When you're an Anglican, you just go to church and you go home.
Yeah. Well, I'll give. I did attend an evangelical church for a while, and I liked it. I didn't like the sort of size and scope and the enormity of it. Gave it a kind of rock atmosphere, sort of like a. It felt the whole elevation of people being on a stage instead of being on an altar. I didn't like. I like. I'm very old fashioned in my sensibilities. I like the sense of an altar as opposed to a stage. But I did there, but I did enjoy it. But it'll work itself out. I'll be led to the right place. I know that quite
So,
deeply.
Jason, your last name is Hill. Hill is a somewhat famous name in Jamaica.
Hmm.
Robert Hill. So, do you know Robert Hill, the Garvey expert?
That's my cousin. Yeah, and
Oh, your cousin.
my grandfather was Frank Hill, who was one of the pioneers of the independence movement.
Yes.
Yeah, he was. He
The
was.
four H's, right?
That's those are my people. My father, my grandfather, his brother, my uncle, and yeah, yeah, that we're all related. It's funny, when I was in school, I had to learn about the four H's in the history books, and I tried to opt out of the exam. And my history
Well,
teacher said,
I don't know if you are familiar with this person. So, this person's name was Richard Hill, and Richard Hill was around in the early 19th century. He was an anti slavery advocate, an established figure in the West Indies, semi white, of white and Indian descent. I don't understand the Indian descent part. I'm figuring that probably his mother was one of those Indian women who
"Hmm.
were exported to Jamaica from either America or somewhere else in the Americas, because there was a slave trade where Indians in America would sell slaves to planters, and sometimes white people would sell American Indians to planters in the West Indies. So I don't know if she came from that branch. But Richard Hill was this prominent Jamaican during the early 19th century. I don't know if you are related to him.
Was he of Scottish descent?"
I don't know if he was of Scottish descent, but he was really prominent in Jamaica. Anti slavery advocate, a stipendiary magistrate, really prominent.
Mm. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Richard Hill was really prominent. So I've never met him before. I saw him maybe once in Jamaica. Robert Hill. I know he's a Garvey expert, but
Yes.
I assume that he was your uncle.
No, he's my cousin. He's my cousin. He's my father's cousin. He's my father's first cousin, so he's my second cousin. And we used to be, we were quite close until he retired. We used to have long intellectual conversations about Garvey and um, just about intellectual history and the history of Jamaica. He had a, no, I wouldn't say he had an enormous influence on my thinking, but there was a method to his thinking that, as a young undergraduate, when I was doing my degree, I really respected and admired. Um, so yes, we were very close because he was at UCLA, and
Yes.
he would come to Atlanta quite often when I was there to visit because we had
So,
other
so
relatives
Jason,
there.
which school did you attend in Jamaica? Which high school?
I went to Campion College.
I figured
I went
that
to
you went to
Campion.
Campion
I went
College.
to Campion College. Yeah, yeah. I went to Campion. I went to Mona
I
Prep,
figured.
Mona Prep, and then Campion College.
I just knew that you went to Campion College.
Why is that?
But you know, Campion is an excellent school. It has a really good reputation,
Hmm.
especially now. And I said, you know, probably somebody like Jason, you did not attend an all boys school.
No.
No, so I figured maybe you went to Campion or somewhere like that. When I did GSAT, I picked for Campion, but it was my second choice. My first choice was Arden.
Oh, you went to Arden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I tell people those are the two top co-ed schools in Jamaica. Like,
I actually went to Arden for 1 year and then transferred to Campion after second form.
oh, you went to Arden for 1 year and then you transferred.
Yeah, I did first form in Arden, and then transferred to Campion from second form all the way to sixth form. Yeah.
Well, I'm not surprised. Like, I don't know, but something told me that somebody like Jason decided you went to Campion, Wilmot's Boys, or Arden.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so okay, why did you transfer?
I was kind of bored at Arden, and I wanted to be more academically stimulated. It was a
Okay.
it was a good school, but I felt a little understimulated.
Okay. No, that's okay. Well, it's interesting that you said that, because what I find really fascinating about Ardent history and the history of Jamaican schools during that era is that many of the teachers were well trained.
Yes.
Yeah, they like I was saying to somebody, I was having a conversation with a friend, an older lady, and we are saying that schools like Campion and Arden, they do well because of the human capital of their teachers. And unlike other prominent high schools in Jamaica, those schools are still relatively middle class. So
Yes.
their teachers are like, when I was at Arden, many of my teachers prior to teaching work in the private sector, or they were from relatively middle class families. So the teachers who work at those schools, their families are not necessarily poor. They experience, but they have the human capital to transmit.
Yes. That is true.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
is
yeah.
true.
Yeah, because they always have degrees, like the church. Yeah, that's why they have done so well. A lot of, like, somebody on social media, I don't remember the person's name, he was talking about schools, and he said Arden was not always Arden, Campion was not always Campion, and I didn't respond, but I said yes, but today people want to go to those schools.
Yes. 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 Yeah. They're still very good schools.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Like, if people who are going to those schools today, if they were around maybe in your time, they'd have wanted to attend JC or St. George's College. A friend was saying that the Campion was known as the reject, the school that George's people rejected, something like that.
No, I think when I was at Campion was still a very, very highly top school. I mean, it was like the top school. I mean, yeah, I think so when I was going there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, and then you went to abroad to study.
Yeah, I did A levels at Campion, and then I worked at the Gleaner as a reporter for a year as an investigative journalist for a year, and then then went to the States after that. Yeah.
Okay. But whenever I read about you in the Jamaican newspapers, you never mention either of your high schools.
No, I think I did one interview that where I talked about Campion quite a bit, but people generally are more focused on my life in America for some reason, and they never they never talk about. Like I did an interview on Profile in Jamaica last year, and I spoke a lot about what it was like being at Campion. But when people interview me, they rarely ask about my childhood, or it's always a pleasure to talk about being at Campion or growing up in Jamaica. But most people talk about are just very interested in my life in America and my beliefs and my viewpoints and so on and so forth.
Yes. Well, we have been speaking for a little over 1 hour, and I like to have interesting discussions. But in the email, you said I could ask you anything at all, and I've read your work, and you said that what you're no longer gay again, something like that.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would just say that it's. I wrote an article saying that I wasn't born that way, and I sort of attributed to that. I was trying to figure out this notion that we're born with a particular sexual orientation has always. Um, I think in one sense it's true, but I think in another sense it's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And and I and I sort of did an investigation of my life after having been through therapy for 6 years,
Yeah.
and realized that given the complicated relationship with my mother, who just died 2 months ago, I was taking care of her, and the fact that I was sexually molested, which not a lot of people I had not talked about this
Yeah,
at
that's what you
all.
said. That's why I didn't bring it up. Personally, I'm not really interested
Yeah.
in like sex and people's personal life, but if you want to talk about it, you can.
What I sort of had not talked about it until I started writing these letters to God, and then it came out in one of
Question
the.
though, Jason, did you tell your mama?
No,
You didn't
never.
tell her any at all?
No,
Wow.
no. I
She would
protected
have
her.
been like really pissed if you told her.
She would have been hurt, and I didn't want to. I wanted to protect her from that hurt.
Wow, 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 wow.
Yeah. So the thing is that um, I was trying to figure out the roots of this orientation, and whether there's a genetic component to it, and there could be a partially genetic component and a socio-causal factors associated with it. I needed to get to the root of it and to understand myself a little bit better, which I think I have. Um, but as I say to people, that's sort of an issue between myself and God, and I'm happy to share some of my experiences and some of my ideas about it with people. But yeah, it's something that was very, very private for many
Yeah.
years, and then I sort of shared it with a few people in a couple of interviews because it was part of the book, and it just sort of organically came out. I'd
Well, I
never
haven't
told it.
read that book yet. I haven't read that book yet. But in the book, what do you say about the experience? Do you talk about the person who molested you?
Yes, I talk about that person with God, and that's how it came out. I hadn't planned on it, but
Okay.
it just organically came out.
Okay,
And
but question again, the person, is he named in the book? Like, do you say his cousin,
N-
uncle, whatever?
no,
Not a,
no, no. It was a field worker. On my grandfather had a huge estate
okay.
in Yalas. He gave it to himself as a retirement gift, and it was by the beach, and he had lots of chickens and duck and pigs and goats and stuff, and it was like his retirement gift. And it was one of the workers on the estate who molested me, and I was about 6 or 5. And so I don't call his name or anything like that. I just mention the person, and I don't get into the details of what happened either. And I never will.
You don't have to. You don't have
No,
to.
I don't have to. But
But do you know what's so? You said that the person who molested you was a worker on your grandfather's estate, and personally, I am not. surprised, Jason, because in the Jamaican society, there's this perception that if you're gay, you're upper class.
Mm,
But speaking to people and experience has taught me otherwise.
yeah,
A lot of them are not the people we expect them to be.
right.
Yeah, a lot of them are like workers, very aggressive people. You don't expect that type of man to be gay.
That's right. That's
And
right.
it really baffles me. I'm like, it baffles me because you don't expect that type of man to have that concept for some strange reason.
I think so. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And that's it's an unfortunate experience. But at that time in Jamaica, I'm sure if you had said something, the other field workers would have killed him.
Well, yeah. I mean, it would have, and he told me not to say anything to anyone. Yeah. So I sort of just buried it and never said anything, and never talked about it until now, until the last couple of months.
Yeah,
So
knowing that some of those men know, they would, if they listen to this, they would want to know who was it.
yeah.
Yeah, they
Right.
would really want to know because they would, if he's dead, they would want to kill him again.
Yeah.
And you know, they would really want to know. They would, like I know Jamaica, they would listen. They would be like, who was the gay fool that man?
Right. Yes.
Well, and you kept that for all these years.
Yes. I never said anything to anyone. I didn't feel it was. I just. Yeah. There was. It was. It wasn't. I was a very private person,
Yeah,
and I didn't think that that was something that was to be shared. And had I not written this book, Letters to God, I would never have shared it. It's just that it's such an intimate and raw and vulnerable book. Most all of
yeah,
my books are very, because I'm a very cerebral person. All of my
yeah.
books are intellectually oriented, and this is the first book that's written directly from the heart. It's unmediated, it's raw, it's vulnerable. It's a one-to-one series of conversations with God, and I just found myself just being channeled and talking about this experience with God and saying, you witnessed this and you saw what happened, and and yeah, and then people got early versions of the manuscript and read it,
Okay.
and it sort of came up, and
And you know the American media, that's the only thing that those people care about, sex. Yeah, that's that. Yeah,
right, right. But I think I'm finished. I don't think I'll talk about it that much anymore. I
you
mean,
don't have to.
yeah, yeah,
I do you know what baffles me? How do people have sex with children?
yeah. It's sick.
No,
It's
how
just,
no, how do you?
it's absolutely sick. It's
I
so,
don't know
it's,
that have sex with a child. I don't know.
yeah, it's a perversion.
Yeah, that's something that really baffles me.
It's really evil.
It is no. How do you have? How do can people reach that level where
Yes,
they want to sleep with a child?
I know.
No, it's not funny. It's disgusting. Like whenever I hear stories like this, I am repulsed. I just can't understand why they would do it.
Right.
I just don't get it.
Yeah.
I really don't. I would love to go into the nine of a pedophile because there's nothing attractive about a 6 year old.
Exactly.
There's
Exactly.
nothing attractive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to dwell too much on the issue, but personally, no, I'm so upset. I just think that that person should be punished because there's nothing cute about what he did.
Right.
Like there's
Right.
nothing cute about what he did any at all. Like
No.
even if he's alive, he needs to be arrested. No, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
There's nothing cute about molesting people. Like I'm not in the business of naming and shaming people, but when you do things like that, you need to be named and shamed.
Well, the important thing is that I've asked God to forgive him, and I have forgiven him, and
you,
that's the most important thing. So,
yeah, you need to be. Well, that's for you, but you need to be named and shamed. I don't.
yeah,
That's not something that I believe in naming and shaming people, but that's for me. That's unfair. It's really bad.
yeah, yeah,
And many of these people, in their head, they have done nothing wrong.
yes,
Then like sometimes, like even the Nazis, some of the Nazis were sorry for what they did, but many molesters, they don't repent. It's like no big deal. Like I've heard Jamaican men say, "Okay, I impregnated this girl when she was 15," and it's nothing.
Yeah.
It's really nothing. And I maybe I'm different, but that's something I just can't understand it. I can't. I don't care if a boy was molested by an older woman, because in Jamaican culture there's a tendency for people to ignore that.
Yes.
I just can't understand it at all. And the book has been published, right?
Yes, it's out. Yes.
Okay, the book has been published, so people can go on Amazon and buy it. So, do you
It's,
plan to write more books?
oh yes. I'm yes, definitely. Yeah. I want to write a follow-up book to this book, Letters to God from a Former Atheist, called Why Was I Born and Other Questions for God. And then there's another book that I'm working on the relationship between creativity and madness and art and genius and
Yeah, read this lady. Her name is Nancy Anderson. I think that's her name.
Mhm.
She's one of the. Are you familiar with her?
No, not at
She
all.
writes on the link between genius and creativity and madness.
Oh
That's her
yes.
thing. Yeah,
Oh good.
Nancy
What that's her name? Nancy what?
Nancy Anderson. Yeah, she had a brilliant piece in the Atlantic some time ago. Let me look for it. I don't want to make an error. Atlantic. Nancy Anderson. Creativity, creativity and madness. It was in Atlantic magazine. Yeah, hold on. Don't let me see. Yeah, by Nancy C. On Nancy C. Andreasen. So it is Andreasen. Andreasen. Nancy Andreasen. So
Okay, so you have my email. Can you send me the link?
of course, I definitely will.
Yeah, okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Good.
I definitely will. And you write for Front Page Magazine.
That's right.
Yeah, how did that relationship start? How did you get in touch with Front Page? Because I've been doing it for quite some time.
Well, I wrote this article. I think, but I was awarded a journalism fellowship by Robert Shillman, who was reading my books. I think we have overcome, and he offered me a journalism fellowship through the Front Page magazine. And David Horowitz, who just died, who was the publisher,
Yeah, I like
contact-
David Roberts. I didn't know him, but I liked him.
yeah, so he contacted me and he said, Robert Shillman offered you a fellowship, a paid fellowship. So would you like to? You'd have to take it up at the magazine. So yeah, I write a column for them every month, and I've been doing it since 2019. Yeah.
Yeah. I like well it's not liked because I still, but yeah, I like David Horowitz.
Yes, I do too.
Yeah.
I've reviewed a lot of his books in the magazine.
Yeah,
So
a lot of people like David Horowitz.
fearless man.
What did you say?
He's a very fearless man. He
Yeah,
was a very
yeah,
fearless
yeah.
man. Yeah.
Look, personally, this might sound a bit offensive, but I don't think that today we have particularly good commentators. Like
Yes.
I would listen to a David Horowitz or a Milton Friedman or an Ayn Rand, but many of the commentators there just don't think that they're that smart. Sorry.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's like you're wasting your money. They're funny people, but they're not like bright.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, but they still get opportunities and people pay to listen to them, but I just don't see the point.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But yeah, but thanks for coming on. So we're wrapping up, and I have to release it so you can go and do other stuff because I can talk for a long time.
Thank you so much, Lipton.
All
It
right,
was really great to
hold
be with
on.
you.
Yeah, hold on. Yes, let me end the recording.